Hello, my name is Ellen Thompson, and I'm a literacy consultant with Partnerships for Literacy and Learning right here in Vermont. I've created a video called Vocabulary Matters, and it's a video for teachers, something you can use in your classroom. So, a little bit about me. You can see from the pictures. I'm a mom, I am a sister, I am a spinner, I'm a wife, I'm a goat farmer and baby goat feeder, a gallery owner, and I'm also an islander. And that's a view from my road up there. So this video will talk about vocabulary instruction and the fact that it matters. We'll talk about what the research says for a few minutes, and then also some guiding principles for vocabulary instruction. And then the last piece are 5 instructional moves that you can try out in either a classroom environment or a digital environment. It doesn't really matter. You can do it either way. So, starting with the research, what do we know? We know that children acquire up to 4,000 words per year. That's a lot of words, and that's from Beck McKeown's research. We also know that in school, they're instructed in less than 400 words per year. So there's kind of a mismatch between those two numbers. So we know that children are learning lots and lots of words somewhere, somehow, but we're not always the ones doing it. So let's think about what it means to know a word. For kids to actually learn words, they have to understand that words are very complex. You often, when you're learning a new vocabulary word, you don't learn it all at once. There are definitely degrees of knowing it. You sort of get it. It takes a while before you actually begin to use the word. Words are also multidimensional. There's a spoken form, there's a written form, there's associations with other words. Often vocabulary words in particular hold a lot of conceptual meaning. Words have a certain frequency to them. There's certain words you use a lot, certain words you don't. And then there's the register. So certain words would belong in a job interview and certain words would not. And knowing that difference is extremely important for kids of all types and ages. Again, words have more than one meaning. They can be polysemic. Polysemic was a new word for me a few years back. But basically, it means that in different situations, it's the same written word, but it means something totally different. This happens a lot from content into speaking language. So you'd see some words that transfer different meanings depending on where they're being used. And words aren't isolated. They relate to other words. So it's really important for us to think about what are the relationships between the words we're teaching and the things that kids know and understand and are able to do. So basically, knowing a word really depends on what kind of word it is, where it's being used, how often it's used. There's a lot of dimensions to this idea of learning a word. Some elements that are needed for good vocabulary instruction. This is probably one of my favorite slides of all. It's from McKeown and Beck and their other friends, as you can see along the bottom of the slide. But basically, what the research has pointed out that all instructional methods produce more word learning than no instruction. Duh. That's a big duh. So in other words, if you teach it, they will learn it, and so they will produce more word learning. But the thing the research has not been able to show is whether there's one way to do this. Is one method better than another? So no one method has yet been proven superior. I like this. That means we can play around with this a little bit and we don't have to check off that we did this certain thing every single day. The research does point out, though, that a variety of methods has advantages. So this idea of jazzing it up, you're not going to have kids just write the word in the sentence every single day for the rest of their life. You got to figure out some other ways for them to sort of have a need for the word and use the word too. The other piece that we know is that children need repeated exposures to the words. You're going to hear me say this a couple of times throughout the slideshow. The research points to the idea of 10 to 40 encounters with a word. So if you're just writing the word in a sentence, that's one. We need to get to 40. So we want to get the words in their mouths, in their writing, in their conversational speech, wherever it makes sense, those words should be used. Why bother? We've got a lot of other things to teach, so why spend so much time on vocabulary? One of the reasons is that there's a direct link from the amount of vocabulary you understand to your comprehension of reading. Again, this is sort of another one of those duh moments. If you know a lot about a topic already, and then you begin reading about that topic, you're going to connect to the information much more quickly than somebody who has no background knowledge. So again, this link between vocabulary knowledge, which basically names your background knowledge, and comprehension of reading is huge. The other piece is that those 4,000 words that kids learn, most of them are from their reading. So the amount of words acquired from context is dependent upon the amount of text read and the ability of the child to read it. So think about that. If you've got kids in your room who aren't reading very much, well, they're not getting so much of the vocabulary from that text. And worse yet, if you have a child who's a struggling reader, who's reading text that's below level, then they're really going to have a hard time with getting that grade level appropriate vocabulary to really boost their understanding of the text and of the vocabulary. So a good reader will learn up to 5 times more words than a struggling reader. It really has to do with volume, stamina, and that ability to read, to have access to those 5 times more words. And then lastly, culturally, vocabulary knowledge and usage is an indicator of intellectual ability. You do it all the time. You can have conversations with people that you don't know very well, and right away in your head you'll say, well, that guy's really smart, or that one really knows what she's talking about. And why do you say that? Go back and think about that. It's the words they choose, and it's how they put them into context and how they make meaning with them. So again, we want all kids to have that ability. This slide just says it all. The rich get richer. So for those kids who come to school with less experience, less exposure to and understanding of vocabulary, there's an ever widening loss of understanding as they get older. So the gap just keeps increasing. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. These children have less language to work with when they begin, and as a result, show less and less understanding of language through their school years. That's a pretty sober accounting. So we have kids coming to school with less background knowledge, less experiences than their peers. Then, if they struggle with reading, they're getting less exposure. So, what do? We could throw up our hands and say, not my problem, or we could begin where the kids are and just begin front loading as best we can to give them more experiences and more vocabulary to name those experiences. So here are some guiding principles for instruction. Again, this can be at home, this could be in the classroom, wherever. So when you're thinking about vocabulary, you want to think about and select words that kids will encounter while they're reading. So if you have a class novel going on, or if it's a read aloud, whatever it is, you might want to begin with some words from that context that the kids will actually hear and understand. When you have those words, you want to teach those words in relation to other words. My thing is, you want to pick a word that grows other words. So words that are highly or full of conceptual understanding will have lots and lots of words associated with them. So take the word restaurant. When I say that word to you, probably without even meaning to, you started to think about menus and food and waiters and waitresses and bills and ordering and tips, but the words just come tumbling forward. But the word restaurant is a great word that holds those other words within it. You also want to teach students to relate words to their background knowledge. We need to give them the names for the things they know. Vocabulary is a great marker of knowledge if you understand its relationship to what it is you know. Teaching words is important, as we said before. So if you do something before the reading with words to activate knowledge, and then take those same words that you've chosen and use them in the post-reading discussion, response, and retelling. So again, remember that 10 to 40 encounters, that pre-reading, talking about the words there's one exposure. You're actually reading the text, there's two. We're talking about the text afterwards using those words, there's three. We want to do a written response, that's four. So we get up to 5, 6, 7 different encounters with the word in just one lesson. So teach words systematically and in depth. This is not the time for clarifying statements. Oh, you don't know what that word is? Let me tell you. Great, but that doesn't get it into their mouths or into their writing. The last piece is that you, and this is an interesting one because it is researched. It's a research. It says this. We need to do this. It's this idea of awakening in your kids an interest and enthusiasm for words, and it's actually called word consciousness. So when your students actually begin to notice words and really start to play with words and share words with other people, they are going to generate more known vocabulary for themselves. So it's important. We want them to have fun with words. We want them to begin to do that on their own. Here's that idea of 10 to 40 encounters with a word. It is so, so important. There's, as we said before, there's levels of understanding for each word. The first time you hear a very complex vocabulary word, oftentimes you just have no idea what it means. Sounds kind of cool, looks good, no idea, just don't know. Um, Eventually, if you hear the word more times and used in different places, you'll get a general sense of the meaning of the word. I like to tell a story of one of my word learning pieces in that I had a college professor who had a great working vocabulary, and this was a literacy professor. So this person would could talk and tell a story and do all these things, but there was always something in the class, a vocabulary word that I often had no idea what it meant. None whatsoever. But I loved the way that she put it out there. So I started to keep a notebook and I started to write down some of those words because I wanted those words too. And I wanted to know how to use them. And I actually just needed to know what they were. So I had no idea. Um, Eventually, I had a general sense of the meaning because this person used those words a lot. So I was beginning to hear it in different contexts. But my understanding of it was really narrow. It was only in the literacy classroom, it was only in this one thing, and it was very context bound. And so that's what kids do too. They'll have a science word that they know in science class, but you mention it somewhere else and they will have no understanding for it at all. Um, from there, kids have a knowledge of it. They know what it means. They absolutely do, but they cannot readily use it. And I will tell you that for me, with that professor and that, and one of the words in particular that I can think of, it probably took me 2 years before I would actually say that word out loud. And that's the truth. I knew how to use it. I knew where it could be, but I just was not secure in my understanding, not in my understanding so much as in my readiness to like put it out in the public. So that 2 years from no idea to knowledge. And then the last one you want is this rich, decontextualized knowledge of a word's meaning, its relationship to other words, and its extension to even metaphorical uses. You can use that word, you know where it goes, you put it out in play, and you're not blinking afterwards. And I did that. I was able to, with this one word in particular, begin to use it. And this year in particular, it's kind of been one of my favorites. And I'll even tell you what the word was. The word that a few years back that I had no idea what it was the word bifurcate. Bifurcate. Going down two paths. I get it. I know how to use it now. Bifurcate. So here's the deal. When we start doing this thing, teachers get really stressed out because what words do I use? And you also know you can't teach 4,000 words. So there must be a list. There must be something that will tell me which words are the best words to teach. Well, sorry about that. There really isn't. Your class, your kids, your curriculum is yours. And so you're the one who's going to have to decide which words you're going to spend time with. I would tell you to choose words that help grow more words. Think about that example of restaurant. I'd also say that you want words that are deep with conceptual understanding. Those are the ones, again, that will grow more words. There's just more texture to them. You can talk about them in ways that really will arouse that word consciousness for kids. And you want to pick words that matter. You know, we're in a pretty political time of life right now. You want to pick words that kids can use when they're debating or when they're showing evidence for their learning. So things that really, really matter. This research about the three types of vocabulary comes from the work of Isabel Beck and Margaret McGowan. It helps me when I start to think about what kinds of words do I want to pick. If I'm a literacy teacher, I have a certain interest. If I'm a science teacher, I may have a different interest. So again, as I said before, there isn't one list. It really matters upon what you're doing with the kids. But they come in three forms, and that's pretty. People pretty much agree upon this. That the tier one words are basic language. They're the everyday words. Primary teachers are wrapped up in this a lot because they're doing a lot with basic language in that beginning reading time, sight words, and as you're doing phonetic spellings and whatnot, they're going to be those everyday words. Tier three is the content vocabulary. Okay, so I jumped over one, but tier three is content. So if I'm a science teacher, I'm really interested in a certain bank of words. These are the words that help kids unlock sort of the principles of science instruction. So that's great, but you don't often hear a lot of those words on the playground. So again, they're words that are in a content. And the one I skipped over is tier two, because I think this is the one that really needs our attention the most as literacy teachers for sure, but also all teachers. These are the words that enhance meaning. These are the words that make you sound smart. They're sophisticated. They ratchet up the description of a character. They're no longer good or bad. They're evil, stunning, brilliant, whatever they are. But you're going to grow up those basic words into these kind of wonderful, playful words that enhance meaning. These are the words that, in a lot of cases, kids do not often hear or encounter at home. Okay, if you're in a busy household, there's a lot more directive language. Do your homework, shut off the TV, do whatever. So again, it kind of behooves us to make sure we put into our instruction time for kids to use these words, because these words are going to prove super uber important when they're in high school, when they're applying to be in a club, when they want to have a job, when they're trying to get into college. These are the things that will make them sound and actually be smarter. So, how can we support new vocabulary learning at home and at school? I'm going to share with you, kind of quickly, 5 instructional moves that can be performed with the teacher or other learning partners. The first one has to do with, how do you know what words your students already know? Like, let's not waste time with that. Like, what words should we center on? So, really, it's not a tough question. Just ask them, do you know these words? And the funny part is, kids will usually tell you yes or no. So I use a knowledge rating chart, KRC for short. But a knowledge rating chart is a great way to find out what your kids know, even if you're not with them. So you could give them a list and give them the rating chart, and you ask the kids to rate their word knowledge before doing anything else. If they are working with a peer or they're working with an adult at home, that other person can check out the results. What I like to do is group kids around their rating charts and say to the kids, hey, do you have a word that you know really well? Is there a word you'd like to know better? And let the group kind of duke that out and kind of talk it through. Here's an example of one for youngers. Generally speaking, I have made almost like word mats or rating chart mats that are laminated with words I know, words I think I know, and words I do not know. Then often I take those words on the left, put them on cards, and the kids will actually sort them. But in this case, I picked 4 words from a unit on matter. And I've asked the kiddo, what do you know? What words do you know? And they put their X's in the right column. So this child knows liquid and gas. They think they know what a solid is, and they're not at all sure about matter. Well, that does help me when I'm thinking about what I need to teach and what I want kids to actually know, understand, and do when we're done with that unit. And another example from an older group, I actually used these words with a group of sixth graders. And again, their science vocabulary, satellite devoted endeavor, and so on. And now the knowledge rating chart has grown up a little bit. So it's, I have no idea about the word. I've seen it and I've heard it. I can tell you what it means, and I can use it in talking and writing. Um, Again, you can see there's kind of a scatter plot across there. Sometimes with talking and writing, I might even ask the kids to flip the paper over and write me a sentence with one of those conduct progressed precisely on the back so I can see what it is they know. And their sentence has to show what the word means. That's important too. Um, and then this I do before we start the lessons, before I start the unit. Um, at the end of the unit, I can hand them back their knowledge rating chart and say, "Hey, has anything changed?" And then have them move their X's where they would be at the end, and that becomes a self-assessment tool for the unit vocabulary. I don't need to give them a test at the end. They're telling me, and I have to trust that part from them. They really, really do tell you the truth. Okay, second one. This is word nominations or vocabulary nominations. They love finding great words. This again goes to that word consciousness. So we need to give them a time and a place to do that. And then use the words. Don't just have them find them and then just store them away on a piece of paper. You want to actually play with them. So I would have students nominate a new word from their reading for the class to know more deeply. So maybe every student nominates one word, two word, three words, doesn't matter. You collect those words or somebody collects those words and then choose a few of them to challenge your class or your student to use while at home and at school. Students can share how many times they were able to use the words in their reading journal. So keep track of it. In classrooms, a lot of times people will put the word up with a sheet of paper, and when kids use the word in class, they go up and put a tally mark on it. If they hear it, they put a tally mark on it. So at the end of the day, the teacher will go back to that word, bring it out and play again, and say, "Hey, look how many times we use this one. I wonder if we can beat our record tomorrow." Here's a very simple word nomination form that I use with kids from second grade and up. Naming the word, where did the word come from? Was it from our science class or math class? What I think it means, and then actually illustrating the word so that it'll make sense to someone else. This is what would go into the adult or the teacher or the kids, however you want to do it. And then you'd have multiples of these, and you could do a random pick, or you could play it your way. You could pick the words you think are most important to. Either way, they're the kids' words. They've had choice in that, and that helps with the motivation and engagement, and they really kind of like it. A third thing that you can do with words, and actually you could do it from those nominated words, is have your kids create a semantic web for the nominated class words. So you've given them back two words to play with. Now have them do a semantic web. And again, I would keep that in their reading journals so that we have a place to go back and look at what they had. And then as you can see from this one, the bottom semantic web is simpler than the top one, but what if you started a semantic web in your reading journal, and as you read, you learned more, so you added more, so your web could grow? Again, a really, really easy thing for kids to do, whether they're at home or at school. And I keep talking about reading journals, but I always feel like you need a place. You need some place where you can go back and see it. Kids can see the words growing across time. Of course, you want some thinking in there probably about their books and not just vocabulary. But vocabulary is, like I said, it's a knowledge marker. So when you start to save up some of those words and you go back, even not knowing the book that you were reading, I bet you could figure it out just by the words they chose. So they can use them to keep track of their knowledge rating charts. They could be right in there, their nominated words, and then also, again, that semantic webbing of vocabulary so that they could go back and grow those even more. And then the last one I wanted to just make sure we talked a little bit about is this idea of read alouds. First of all, I am a read alouder. I love to read aloud. And I think that was probably my strongest instructional stance in my classroom and with adults. I love to read aloud. So you want to have a read aloud daily, maybe two or three. And again, home or school doesn't matter. But not in every read aloud, but in some, especially ones that have great vocabulary. I might choose 4 or 5 words from a new chapter to share, or from a picture book, whichever. And I'm going to share those 4 or 5 words before the reading begins. In other words, I'm not letting the kids in on the book, I'm really letting them in on the words. And then I have the kids use those words to create sort of a story map. They're going to predict what the next chapter will be about, or what the picture book will be about. And then we'll talk about that, and we'll share our predictions. And then, the class may decide on one prediction that they think is, really robust, and they think that's what it's going to be. And then we're going to, we're going to read the book. And then while we're reading, we may nominate new interesting words for the class. So kids, once they get this word consciousness, they'll actually say, hey, wait a second, that word was awesome. Can we put that word on the chart and talk about it later? Yeah, let's do that. So again, you want to acknowledge those times where kids are really noticing words. So here's a read aloud example. So I might take the book Arnie the Donut by Lori Keller, because I really like it. But before I even show the kids the books, I may say to them, here are 5 words that I pulled from the book: conversation, wasteful, inseparable, grateful, discovered. Now I want you to think by yourself, what do you think these words have to do with a story called Arnie the Donut? Take a couple minutes to think about that. What do you predict will happen in this story? Why are these words so important? So, how'd you do? There's Arnie. There's the donut. Did you decide that Arnie was a talking donut? Of course he was by the title. But anyway, it's a fun book. And those words do help you make a great prediction about the story. And by doing that, you're talking about them before, you're talking about them during, and I guarantee you'll talk about them afterwards too. By the way, it's a great, funny book. You should read it. So I think we're at the end, because I see a picture of me, and this is a much younger me, much younger, like 150 years ago, but I'm reading aloud to an audience of students and family members. I'm actually reading aloud during our author's tea. You can see kids sitting up next to me up front, and I'm reading from a book that I published myself, just like my kids did. So again, I always did what I asked my kids to do. You can see the audience is listening in. Um, Again, reading aloud, really, really important. So a little bit more about me. You got the pictures in the first part, but I am a longtime educator, over 43 years. Yes, that does make me old. Many of my years as a classroom teacher, I taught over 21 years in that classroom you saw on the page before. But I was a multi-year classroom teacher by choice. I taught kids from 6 to 9 years of age, otherwise known as grades 1 through 3, and I loved every minute of it. From there, I started doing some national consulting. And at some point in time, I was invited in to be a faculty member on the literacy faculty member for the elementary education teacher prep program, which I adored, because I had gone to school there for my undergrad and also my master's degree. While I was there, I did get my doctorate, and then I set out again into public ed, and I went to Essex Town and became their curriculum and technology director for 13 years. And now I've left public ed again, but I'm certainly working with it as a literacy consultant with partnerships in literacy and learning, and loving every minute of it. I get to be in schools with teachers and talking about books, and the joy of that. Couldn't get any better. If you have any questions, you can email me, ethompson@pllvt.org. And other than that, I'll say thank you. There might be more videos, you never know. Let me know what you think.